Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here today for our second episode of the Stay at Home Macro podcast. We are going to be talking today about the budget crisis facing state and local governments in this COVID-19 crisis, the public health crisis, and the economic crisis that we are facing. I am so pleased to have three absolute experts on this topic, and experts in many different dimensions of it, is it's going to take us a lot to unpack what are the effects of the crisis on all of us. So first, we have Louise Sheiner. Louise is a senior fellow in the Economic Studies program at the Brookings Institution, and she is also the policy director at the Hutchins Center on Fiscal and Monetary Policy. So I had the privilege of working with Louise during the last great financial crisis and Great Recession. We were both on the staff's macro forecast at the Federal Reserve Board. So I learned a lot from Louise about the state and local government sector, and you all will today too. Actually, I'm going to learn something today too. I know I will. Okay, and next, Leah Brooks, and Leah is an associate professor of public policy and public affairs at George Washington University. Okay, so I met Leah when I was a research assistant. We were both research assistants at the Brookings Institution, and yeah, that was like 20 years ago. But we're getting older and wiser. Our hair looks a little different than then. But hey, you know, it's good. Good stuff. And then we have Kristen Broady. Kristen is a full professor of economics, and she is the dean of the College of Business at Dillard University. I first met Kristen in person just a few months ago, early this year, before everything fell apart. And I met her at the Sadie Collective second annual conference, and Kristen led an amazing panel of, the whole conference was just an amazing testament to how much we need Black women in the economics profession, and frankly, just out in the world. My socks were blown off, and I was totally privileged to be there, and it was so amazing not to look like basically anyone else in the room, and oh my God, I learned a lot. That was really cool. It's really sad the world has changed a lot since then. So in we shall go to a conversation that's really important, but it is really, really hard too. So first, I want Louise, and I think it's important in every single conversation about this crisis, we absolutely need to start with the facts, and we need to lay those out on the table and make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. So Louise, can you just explain to us why we have this crisis and what does this mean at kind of a high level?
All right, so we're focusing today on the state and local sector. So state and local governments are big players in the economy. They count for roughly 13% of overall employment, so this is not a small sector. And state and local governments typically have to balance their budgets every year. Unlike the federal government, which, as you know, can run huge deficits, state and local governments do not have that privilege. They have basically by law have to do some kind of balanced budget, have some kind of balanced budget constraint. It actually varies across the states in terms of how stringent it is, but at least every state governor has to submit a budget which is projected to be balanced. So what does that mean in the current crisis? Well, what do states and localities rely on? They rely on, for financing, income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes. Property taxes are probably okay, at least for a while. But with the drop in consumption, we've seen this huge, massive drop in consumption. Sales taxes are really, they're losing a lot. Some of the sales taxes are like excise taxes too. So gas taxes are also, no one's driving anymore. They're losing all that revenue. And with this huge unemployment rate, this economy is going to be generating a lot less GDP and a lot less income. And that's going to really kill income taxes. So they're looking ahead and saying, really sort of massive declines in revenues, and they have to figure out how to adjust to that. On top of that, they have some near-term pressure that's coming from the fact that when the federal government delayed the April 15th tax filing deadline, since state and localities sort of piggyback off the federal tax system, they delayed their deadlines as well, which meant all this money they'd expected to be coming in April did not come in, and they expected to come in later. So they're scrambling, right? So this happens every recession, right? Because in a recession, taxes generally decline. And on top of the tax decline, there's also facing increased demand for services, right? So as people lose income, they start qualifying for more programs. We expect this big increase in Medicaid. So they face higher spending, lower taxes, and so they tend to react by slashing budgets. And you're already hearing talk about that. They're starting to plan on slashing 10%, 15%, putting off programs that they were about to start, right? So they're feeling a lot of fiscal pressure. That's obviously bad for the constituents who are not getting those services. But there's also a fairly big macroeconomic impact, which is that the way to think about this recession is it primarily induced by a health crisis, right? So that we are sort of forcing the decline in GDP. But what we want to prevent is that the effect on the economy is much bigger than the amount forced by GDP, right? And so what we want to prevent is that once it's safe to go out, people don't spend because they don't have the money. And so one big sector that's sort of like that is the state and local sector, is that if they're going to have to sort of lay off people, not hire, they're going to make getting our economy back to where it was pre-COVID much more difficult. So in the Great Recession, Congress passed quite a bit of aid to states at the beginning, and that offset some of the cuts. But then they turned off the spigot, and state and localities were in very tight budget situations for a very long time. It took about 10 years for the employment at the state and local sector to get back to where the level where it was before the recession. So that's something that we're facing right now. Congress gave $150 billion to the states for corona-related spending, really public health spending, but limited it to that. So that's not money that's available to fill other budget holes. They did give them some Medicaid money that can help, but it's not nearly enough. And so we're really looking for Congress to come in with a big fiscal package to help the states, again, not only to help services, but also to make sure that we do get a reasonable economic recovery, which is so important.
So I have a question about that. So I absolutely agree with all of this, and I could go on and on about how disastrous for the macroeconomy this is. And in fact, just yesterday, Gavin Newsom at one of his press conferences said that they have, I mean, in tens of millions, or no, sorry. I think it's tens of millions. Sorry, I keep billions and trillions. Actually, no, it was billions, 80 billion, something like that. In any case, they have a huge, I mean, okay, California is basically the 5th largest economy in the world, right? So it's a huge economy, you know, millions and millions of people. So they went from, at the beginning of the year, a forecast of having a surplus, and they had finally, to your point, Louise, about making up for 10 years, it took 10 years to get back on track. So they finally were like in this position. They had a strong economy. Their unemployment rate was really low. Like they were low even for the country. It's a powerhouse of our economy. And within less than 2 weeks, they went from like smooth sailing to, you know, plummeting to the bottom of the ocean. And it's clear, I mean, California, like I said, went into this in a good position. So anyone that tells you we're all better off because we went in at a good place is wrong. You know, they're facing a very severe crisis in their budget shortfalls, and they're already making tough decisions about what to cut and who to lay off. So the question I have for you is and I absolutely believe Congress has to pass something. So Mitch McConnell was like, well, they can just file for bankruptcy, and there's no way he wants bankruptcies from sea to shining sea of communities. But I think this is big dollars, but I want to know from you, because you would really like, I imagine even just in the back of your head have a sense of like, what are we talking here? Are we talking 500 billion, a trillion, 2 trillion? Like what do they need right now?
So, I mean, I have numbers that I've sort of read about and thought about a little. It's really hard because it all depends on the economic forecast, of course, right? And so, you know, when do people go back to work? When do things normalize? My guess is we don't really get normalization for, you know, a couple of years, full normalization, at least, that we're going to sort of slowly go back. And so a lot of that's going to depend on what this looks like. The numbers that I've heard are anywhere, and let's think about over a 2-year horizon, 400 to 600 billion dollars. You know, there's a lot of unknowns still, but we're talking big money. I don't think we're talking 2 trillion. But I think, could it get to 800? Yeah, I think it could get to 800 depending on how severe this is. We're going to have to see what happens. They're going to open up. Do they stay open? Do people actually go out to shop? There's so much uncertainty right now. And we haven't really seen too many of the numbers, the actual hard numbers yet. We've seen some numbers on consumption, so you can kind of guess what that might be doing to sales taxes, but, it's early, but it's a lot. And I think when we think about policy solutions, because there is so much uncertainty, you don't want just Congress to just do some one package. I think we really do want to do something that's going to be dependent on something like the unemployment rate, so that we won't have to have this conversation over and over again. That will keep, because we don't know. We don't want to do 2 trillion and it turns out everything's fine tomorrow, which it won't be, but you know what I'm saying? And we don't want to do 200 billion and then, have it happen again. And I think that uncertainty on top of it, if they think they get a little bit of financing for a few months, that's not going to make them really sure that they're going to be able to sail through, and they'll still do some cuts. So I think those are the kind of ballpark numbers we're talking about.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. And especially the point you underscored about there's so much we don't know that we would need to know if we were going to have numbers that we could say with any confidence, the state and local sector needs X $100 billion or Y trillion dollars, So, and I think that's one where I have a very pessimistic forecast, or what I think is coming at us in terms of unemployment. So we learned today, Jobs Day, so today is May 8th. It's really important to put a timestamp on every conversation about this crisis. The unemployment rate that was published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics was almost 15%. The experts there, in their judgment, the actual unemployment, like out in the world, was 20%. Okay, so that we've seen 3 severe recessions. Well, frankly, okay, that 15% is off the charts from 1949, and if it's 20%, this is double the Great Recession and double the 3 severe recessions we've seen since the 1970s. And absolutely, we see this, like state governments are laying off people, local, this is happening. And if that's what you're dealing with, and you're dealing with it not just this year and next year and the year after, that gets really expensive. But to your point, I've been thinking a lot about, and there's movement on the Hill, thankfully, to tie relief, not just the relief that goes to states, but also relief that goes to the jobless benefits, food stamps, unlike every time in the past, having all of those relief be tied to the labor market. Keep the relief going until people tell us they don't need it, and they tell us they don't need it because they're back at work and they have paychecks, and hopefully better paychecks than they had in February, which is another problem. Anyways, but so I think that's where it's important to think about that, but exactly this point, and the more we do and the faster we do it, the better the economy will be. So while I'm really pessimistic, it's not baked in the cake that it takes us a decade and we're still not anywhere good. Okay, so, but would either Leah or Kristen, before we move on, is there anything you want to, just facts, and they don't have to be this macro-y big picture, just anything you want to add on what it looks like on the ground, or what you're looking at in terms of the numbers, or who you're talking to? It can be people too, not.
I guess I'll just add to Louise that there's tremendous uncertainty. I feel like we just, somebody came up with a vaccine tomorrow, we need a heck of a lot less money. How likely is that if somebody came up with a reliable, quick test, if we had some kind of norms for how people could behave to not develop the virus, and all these things seem, unlikely, but possible. And we just, without knowing them, it's really difficult to make a forecast about the future. And it's hard to think, should we make a policy that's, is this a situation where we need a policy because we need help for the next 2 months? Or is this a situation where we need a policy because we're going to be devastated for the next 6 months? When can I get a haircut? When can I get a haircut? And that's going to help me figure out when the economy is going to return to normal, right? I mean, I might not get a haircut as frequently as I used to, but if I'm getting a haircut, I used to get a haircut every 5 weeks. If I got a haircut every 8 weeks, then my hairdresser would be getting paid, not as much as she was before, but still paid. and that would be contributing to the economy and should be paying taxes. And then my kids might have some teachers at school. We just
Can I respond to that too? So I think that's exactly right. But I also think that we have to keep in mind what the cost benefit analysis is of doing too little versus doing too much, right? So if we do too much, let's say we gave a whole bunch of money to the states and like then they were kind of flush. What are they going to do? Well, first of all, we could like take some of it back next year or the year after, by lowering grants. They could, lower taxes, which would have a beneficial economic impact, and then we could raise taxes. Like the costs of doing too much are just not that high. The costs of doing too little are huge and enormous and might sort of forever keep the economy on a low GDP path. So I think it's true that we don't know how much, but really the calculus suggests err on the side of doing more. And especially with interest rates this low, like we can afford to do this. It is a good investment, even though it is a highly uncertain investment in terms of will we need it or not. So I just think that's,
Yeah, no, this is really helpful. I do want to move us off the aggregates and the big picture. This was great we always need to set the stage with the facts. And also, as Leah was talking, it reminded me that she was also a colleague of mine at the board for a while. And so she is a macro forecaster too. So once you're in the family, it's forever. But I know Leah has a lot of really good research, being someone who's focused on urban finance, from your dissertation on, right? So, but one thing that I wanted to make sure we had in the conversation today was that the impact of what's happening in communities does not fall on every member of a community. Every group that's represented in community is the same. And so, Leah, can you talk with us a little bit about what I'm getting at with that and what your research?
Sure.
Is?
So, I think not from my research directly, but from economics research in general, I think what we know is that, taking Louise's stance from a cost benefit standpoint, that investments in early childhood give us the best payoff. And they give us the best payoff, particularly in circumstances where children don't have in their home the ability of their parents to make those investments themselves. So I would say, who's going to be most harmed in the long run from this? It's going to be children in low-income families and poor health families who aren't getting early childhood investments, primarily in education, that are going to help lift them, hopefully into the middle class and keep them there. And those are going to be primarily,
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you talk a little bit about why that is? There's discussions, and I don't agree with them, that, well, Black individuals are much more likely to die of this virus because they were in poor health to start with, and it's sometimes inferring that it's kind of their fault, like they didn't take care of themselves. So, and this is in a different space, like investment education. Can you talk a little bit about why we see that?
Why do we see? So, it seems like there's sort of a trio of factors that make adults vulnerable, right? People who are low income, low health, low quality health before the crisis, and who have jobs that either they've lost or they have to go to in person. That seems like the trio of things that makes you vulnerable. And that trio is much more likely for, obviously low income people and people of color in the US, so Black and Hispanic people. I think it's also true that on average, Black people are less healthy than Hispanic people, but may have jobs less. Actually, I don't know the numbers on whether Black or Hispanics on average are more likely to have jobs that require contact with people. Now,
I think them being in the service sector, I don't know. I think that lower wage jobs, because
certainly lower wage jobs.
You got to see people. So, but how does, I didn't want to derail you. So, but how does this affect then the investments, like the education that they can help prepare their children for? Is that?
So I guess what I had, let me give you a specific example. So in Washington, DC has a universal pre-K program, and evaluations of the universal pre-K program, and universal means that everybody in the city is entitled to a seat for free for their child who is 3 or 4 years old. And, I send my kids to it, it's free. But, and you know, like if I weren't sending my kids to it, I would be paying to send my kids to a daycare or a preschool where they'd probably be fine anyhow. But the person who's best served, to, you know, to my mind, is like the nurse I met when I took my son to the hospital a few months ago, who I think was a single parent and who had 2 kids who had enrolled in DC's universal pre-K. So for her, I don't think she could make the money as a lab tech to send her kids to afford, you know, DC's, to afford the quality that she's getting from DC's universal pre-K program. And the lifetime gains that people estimate from programs like that are just enormous. Enormous for people, enormous for children of people like her, and less enormous for children of people like me, because I can afford to send my kids to that anyhow.
Mm-hmm. So how does then this all interact with now? Do you know what I mean? Like, bring us back to like, well, what
Okay.
does the budget crisis mean? And like, how does this all play out? And how long do we pay for this?
I think, as Louise said, I think how long is a truly open question. But I do think the places that are going to be the hardest hit, and Kristen and Louise should chime in, but my guess is the places budget-wise that are going to be in the long term the hardest hit are places in the inner ring suburbs that are universally or near universally poor or low income. So in a city like DC, we have plenty of low income people, fewer than we used to, but still a substantial low income population. But we also have a very substantial high income population. And I think in the long run, that high income population is going to pull DC out. And that's going to be the same, is my guess, in New York and in lots of cities in the Bay Area. But if you think of cities that are, you know, cities with names you don't know as well because they're smaller, but maybe think of like a Ferguson, Missouri, okay? A city that's small and on the outskirts of a major city, predominantly minority, and with a very low average income. It's Ferguson that's going to really struggle. Ferguson is going to struggle to attract employers. It's going to struggle to balance its budget. And it doesn't have, you know, like the city of Detroit did, these large philanthropic partners that pulled Detroit out of its bankruptcy. I think those are the cities, and those cities are not exclusively minority. I think those are both white and minority, but overrepresented with minority citizens. And those are the places that are going to struggle to provide services, and the lack of services, you know, has a long run consequence.
Yeah, no, it's really, and these are cities and communities that went into this crisis. Like they had been struggling before, and now they're hit with, you know, the tsunami of struggle. So Kristen, can you add to the, like, just give us, I know you have perspective, so take us where you want to on this, but I want to make sure we think more and harder about this.
Yeah, I think I'm in Florida right now, but I live in New Orleans, where Dillard is located, and New Orleans was hit incredibly hard. There are a lot of cases there, and New Orleans, when you think of New Orleans, you think of tourism, you think of the Jazz Fest, you think of the Essence Festival, you think of all of the restaurants, all of the food, and all of those things are shut down right now. So while it has a higher likelihood of recovering than some other states, because those things will come back, they will bring revenue again, just like they did after Katrina. Right now, nothing is happening because the tourism industry is shut down.
Yeah. Do you know, like, I know you're back in Florida now, but I mean, can you tell us anything? Like, it's important to know the numbers and the big picture, but is there anything like from your students, your like people you know that are in the community that you think would help us really, like, this is about people. This isn't.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess I would start with on March 27th, President Trump signed the CARES Act into law. That's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It was $2 trillion. Of that, 14.3 billion went to institutions of higher education. 10% of that was divided between the various HBCUs and grants for small institutions.
And those are, remind us what the HBCUs are?
Historically Black colleges and universities, sorry. But that money has, the costs have exceeded that outlay already, right? So you were talking before about, is it enough? Is it too much? So when you think about 2 trillion, it sounds like a lot, but the portion that went to institutions of higher ed has been spent, right? Or if it hasn't been spent, we know where it's going to go and we need more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, actually, I want to hear more on this from you, because this was really, it's really important to understand what's happening. Well, Leah talked about the pre-kindergarten, like the elementary educate, like the early, and we know from a lot of research, like if we don't start out well in terms of educating, it goes, like, we pay for that a lifetime, but once you get to higher education, so the university that you're a dean and you're a full professor of economics, like those, we also know that getting a college education, that's a big difference too. So communities that have a lot of people without a high school degree, for whatever reason and whatever other group they identify with, they got a tough time ahead of them. So what do you see, like, at your university? Like, what do you see with your students? What this is going to do?
I guess I think about it from 2 different perspectives. I wrote a paper called Obesity and Social Inequality in America, which focused on why African Americans are more likely to be obese. And it's because of the lack of grocery stores. It's because of higher crime rates, which means that people can't exercise, lack of health care. And then I also wrote a paper, Dreaming and Doing, which focused on the relevancy of HBCU. So I think about it from both perspectives, but if I compare HBCUs to PWIs, which are predominantly white institutions, I looked at the IPEDS data, and so of 2,524 public and private nonprofit undergrad degree granting institutions, that's a mouthful, for 2018, there were 230,000 students enrolled at HBCUs versus 10.7 million at the PWIs on the list. So if I'm looking at this, the average enrollment at HBCUs was 2,584 compared to 4,591 at PWI. So that is an easier number to compare, right? Thousands versus hundreds of thousands and millions, right? So if we want to talk about revenues at HBCUs were 112 million versus 346 million at the average PWI. So that kind of tells you the disparity between these 2 types of schools, right? So one of them is going to be better suited to deal with this type of thing than the other one. We could also look at whether students are technologically adept or not. So if we're moving online, are they going to be able to participate in the online classes? And you're kind of thinking, well, yeah, everybody has the internet, everybody has a telephone, everybody has a camera on their computer, but no, right? So if we're looking at these numbers, an average of 75.4% of full-time, first-time undergrads at HBCUs were Pell eligible, right, or received Pell grants versus only 43.2% at PWI. So if you're Pell eligible, that says something about your household income. And then we can think about, do you have internet at home? Do you have access to a computer? Are you going to be able to participate in the type of online learning that we need our students to be able to do, right? So those are the things that I think about. And so what are we doing? What are various HBCUs doing with the money? Schools like Dillard, Alabama A&M, Howard, and others gave students, loan them iPads or loan them computers, or try to get T-Mobile, Verizon, companies like that to provide hotspots so that the students could participate in online learning, even though they really need to be face-to-face. And they're the ones who need it the most.
Yeah. So, so are you in the classroom now? Like, are you teaching an economics course this semester? And if not, like one of your colleagues, like, I'm just curious, you all are doing the right thing. You're trying to get the technology, the resources. I mean, this is something in my son's elementary school. I mean, he's a 4th grader, and there are children that, they got to get the technology to, or else they miss out. And a lot of times they're the ones that need it most. So I'm wondering, are the efforts, are they paying off, or is it still a bumpy ride? So I'm just curious about that, like what it looks like actually.
So I think it depends on the school, because some schools had the online learning, Canvas, Moodle, Blackboard, or whatever it is. And so we could go to online fairly easily.
Mhm.
But again, these are students who want to be in the classroom. All of them don't have stable internet. They want to be in the classroom. They learn best in the classroom. While other schools didn't have those programs, right? And so they were scrambling to try to get these online learning platforms. And so what do you do for the 2 to 3 weeks that it takes for you to get the platform up and running, right? So it's like you lost 3 weeks that we didn't, right? Like having the online platform is the best case. But again, for people who aren't used to that, teachers who aren't used to using it, we're probably the best case. But, and as you can see, they're doing some work behind me, I'm sorry. The joys of technology, right? But yeah, like those are some of the things that we're struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I will say, my son's school, they have Seesaw and they all have little iPads. It is a very privileged community in Arlington that they all had him beginning of the year, and he loses a lot because he doesn't use it responsibly. But I mean, I have a PhD in economics, and I spent a week like fighting with this Canvas thing to figure out how to get him on the video chat. And it was not until my teenage daughter took over and it's like, Mom, I feel sorry for you. And she finally got him on one of the group chats. So it's like, and I should know how to do this, but I was trying to do some other things. Oh, go ahead. Did you want to?
I was just gonna say, I was on a training earlier today. We're constantly having these trainings to help us learn how to be live or learn how to do various things. And so it's like we have each other, right? We have somebody whose job that is, Dr. Rona Tiger, shout out at Dillard, to teach us how to do it. But what about the students? They're at home. We think that they're more technologically adept than we are, but they don't have anybody training them. None of us were prepared for this, but we're doing the best we can, and more funding would really be great. Hopefully more is coming, particularly for institutions of higher education and HBCUs, because we're doing the best we can with what we have.
No, that's a good point. Louise, did you want to add something there on this point? Or Leah?
So I think Leah has a question, but I just wanted but I'm just going to add it. So I think that Leah's stories and Kristen's stories are telling us, like, from a macro perspective, we look at layoffs, we look at dollars of spending. We don't really care in some sense. A dollar spending cut is a dollar spending cut. But what I think Leah and Kristen are both talking about is that the actual costs really does depend on what is cut, and sort of these huge costs for from some populations. So it's not just the macro we have to worry about, but really these investments in kids and young adults. But Kristen.
So Leah,
sorry, I wanted to unmute.
No.
Kristen, I guess when I was listening to you, I had two thoughts about HBCUs. So I think maybe and higher education more generally, and I think that's a lot of that is financed by state and local dollars, and certainly has a lot of state and local implications, because students who go to these universities then usually work in the communities where they go. So I think from this we're probably going to see a fallout in the university sector, and I suspect that the least well-financed universities, there's a bottom tier of universities that will just disappear, and I suspect that's going to hit communities of color disproportionately, low-income people, communities of color disproportionately. But I think there's one place where I suspect, but I'm not sure, I wanted to ask you, that HBCUs are advantaged, which is American universities sort of for the last at least decade have leaned very heavily on foreign students as a means of growing their revenue. Is that true for, and I think, for my university, George Washington, the departure of foreign students will be if that happens, will be an enormous revenue shock. Does that true for HBCUs or for your university?
So I think, and I could look at the iPad numbers. I've looked at it. I don't have them right in front of me, so I'm going to speak generally about some things that I've seen, right? So I worked at Howard. Howard is very diverse. I saw students from all over the place, large population from Nepal and elsewhere. At Bowie State University, when I was there, much of their MBA, I want to say the majority of their MBA program, the students were from Saudi Arabia, and this was in like 2017. They had an agreement, they did some recruiting. So yeah, it's gonna really hit schools like that or particular programs, right? Like maybe not the whole school, but if a particular program recruited heavily from some particular country and now those students can't be here because their country has said that you need to come back here to maintain your insurance, right? And just as a side note, like we see it here in Florida because many of our neighbors were from Canada. They had to go back to Canada by a certain date. Otherwise, they lose their insurance, right? So same thing for students. So if you had an engineering program, a business program, or whatever the program is that relied on students from somewhere else, and now they're gone, those tuition dollars are gone, your enrollment is down, which means whatever your appropriation, because many schools get money based on how many full-time enrollment students they have. Well, now your population is down, less tuition, and less of whatever that funding is based on your enrollment. So it's a domino effect.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point. Well, and also we're all going to Kristen's house after this. Like I see the people golfing and outside, like this is not a Zoom background. This is her real backyard.
Yeah, this is really the backyard.
Yeah.
This is the golf course. It's amazing. I wish they weren't doing.
Yeah, no, but it's just like
That's okay,
life goes on. I mean, it's really hard, but like we're all still doing it. And it's beautiful. So I do want, well, actually, one point, I think we've all heard this. There are so many, there's so many things that are hitting us in different ways. So this idea of the foreign students, that's not about the budget crisis at state and local. That's not the source of it. It's going to be an aspect of the crisis at universities. We have a lot of policies, both health related and racist, jingoistic, I don't know what the right word is, where we don't want people from outside of this country in this country, like, you know, and that, like, those people that come to the United States and they study in the United States, not only are they an important source of supporting the institution of higher education in dollars and, you know, enriching the classroom, many of them stay. I mean, those of us, I mean, we're all in economics. I mean, seriously, the people that like kicked my ass and I learned the most from in graduate school came from outside of this country.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I have mixed feelings about it that I'm not going to go into right now. But
yeah.
When I was at Alabama A&M, I was the only African American in the department with accounting, finance, and economics. Right, like the school is 98% Black, and I'm the only one. Right, so it's like if you start to pull visas or say that non-Americans can't be here, well, even at HBCUs, who's going to be teaching the classes? But I think to Leah's point, HBCUs generally don't have as many foreign students as predominantly white institutions, so it may not be as big of an effect.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have had an absolutely rich conversation. I want, before we close out, to have a little bit of a speed round in, I don't know, it probably won't end up being happy, but let's pretend it's going to be happy. That each of you can give, like, if you could do one thing, like if you go stand, I may like create a, like, organize a protest at Congress, like if they don't get going with the state and local aid, but like what's the one thing that you would tell them that like we have to do now? So that's what I'd like to hear. So Louise, I'm going to start with you, and again, let's just, you know, keep this quick. We can keep going for hours and hours, but let's, like, you know, speed round this.
So, I mean, to me, the biggest mistake is that we are not actually dealing with the virus and not doing what we can to mitigate it. And, you know, I think, you know, we are sort of starting to open up, but we're not really in any different position than we were when we went into lockdown. I think this absence of testing, of, you know, contact tracing, of making people wear masks, like an absence of changing the way we live, so that without leadership for that, so that we can actually safely reopen up, you know, that is the reason for all the economic problems. And we've just not invested in that in any way, shape, or form in the way we should have.
Okay. All right, Leah?
And I'll second Louise's and say that from a state and local government perspective, I think the most important is that states and localities feel that they have some kind of guaranteed source of funding for what they consider the most basic and core services, you know, the basics of education, fire, sewer, water. I'm not talking about making investments in your sewer lines. I'm talking about making sure that your sewer lines move the sewer out from where it came from to where you want it to be. So I think making sure those basics are assured for communities is critical, because the long run consequences of failure there are very large.
Okay. Kristen.
So I would ask for about 50 things, but I would start with, I don't personally have student loans. I'm blessed in that way, but I would ask that all student loans be forgiven, that the internet be free so that students can learn while at home, that companies that can donate laptops, donate iPads, donate keyboards, things like that for students to use, and that protective equipment be given to universities so that when we do go back to hybrid or face-to-face, we can protect ourselves and our students.
Yeah, no, those are, every single one of you gave good examples. And Kristen, I'm glad you did more than one. That's kind of the, and I think that, you know, and all of you touched on in some ways the public health response. And one thing I've seen, I really thought I'd get through this one without bashing on academic macro men, but I'm sorry, I can't. I've seen a lot of epidemiological models, because they're all, I guess, macro guys dreamed of being epidemiologists, and somehow we got them instead. That like there's been so many models, and I do applaud them for thinking about not everyone is the same, we're not a representative agent, but one of the most common modelings that I've seen is young and old. Now, early on, you know, we learned that the death rates are higher among the elderly, which makes sense for a lot of reasons. It's still absolutely tragic, and I have a friend who's lost his grandmother on Sunday, and she was healthy until she died, right? So like there's, and that's really tragic, and that didn't have to happen, but I also, and actually he was the junior that worked for me when I was at the Council of Economic Advisors, and the week before, another junior who worked, so a research assistant who worked at the council with me, she was posting a very sad tweet about a classmate, a woman of color from her university who was working in New York City, and she died. And it was also, and there was a piece on her in the New York, one of the newspapers, and it talked about like she was very sick and she tried to get care and they told her she didn't need it and they told her to go home, and then she died. Right, so like, and this is very much really, and this disparity in access to health, like Leah talked about that a lot earlier, like this is real and we're paying for this. So I think it's absolutely important we've talked about health. Oh yeah, and in these models where we think, oh, the older the ones that are dying, the young, like they don't get it, and maybe we should just let them all get sick amongst each other, and I don't know. Like no university wants to have an epidemic on their hands, because we know that young adults do die of this, and that's the last thing anyone in a classroom wants to deal with, is their students dropping off and dying, or their colleagues who are teaching, right? So this point about getting the protective equipment to everyone, which we still haven't managed to get to hospitals, or people who are in the grocery stores to make sure we can eat. And anyway, so like we have all kinds of problems, and it's really important as economists, and you all have like added to that discussion, that we're real about this. Like hits everybody, but it hits some people harder, and we have to actually do something. Like thoughts and prayers are not enough here. So the last thing I'll say, and this is my policy plug, and unlike Louise, I really think they need $1 trillion. You know, what's the harm of sending more money to states and local governments? It needs to be
$3 or $4 trillion.
Oh yeah, you know, like when a lot of, well, yes, we could have a long discussion about this. They need money. Like they need money from Congress right now. And I've been doing work on this. The Federal Reserve now has the authority, or is using the authority to lend money to municipalities. So to buy bonds, like so to make loans to all states are eligible, large counties and large cities. New Orleans is still not eligible for this program, but in the expansion of the program, Detroit and Atlanta now are. So there are some cities that really needed to be included that are, but they're loans. They're 2-year loans and they have to repay them. And a lot of these communities, there's no way that they're going to be made whole enough to repay them. And but the Federal Reserve can just do loans under its current authority. Congress can give them more. But right now, that's all they can do. And Congress is the only institution in the entire country that does not have to balance their budget and can just send money, right? So like, it's time for them to do that. And especially, you know, I heard all of you had a nice long laundry list, and they're all really important. And I know Kristen could give us 45 more. Actually, I think all three of you could. But like, at the end of the day, it takes money, and we know how to do this, and we can afford it. And if we don't do it, we're gonna, like, it's gonna be really bad. So on that cheerful note, thank you all. I really appreciate the conversation. There's so much more that we could say about this. Each of you are absolute experts in this area, and I am so blessed that you all would take time today to share that with everybody else. So thank you so much.
Claudia.
Thank you.
Thank you.